The ATEM Mini Pro and ISO are all unprecedented devices in the world of live streaming. Each more expensive model adds features not available in the previous, and each adds not an insignificant cost to get those features. In this video, we'll break down exactly what you get in each model so you can find the right one for you. Hi, I'm Aaron Parecki. I've been a huge fan of the ATEM Mini ever since it first launched over a year ago. I've spent a lot of time using each model, and each one is an extremely impressive device on its own. Prior to the launch of the ATEM Mini, this kind of feature set was only available to large production studios with a huge budget. So really, no matter which model you get, it's a fantastic deal. But let's dig in and clear up some of the differences between these three models. I'm going to assume you're at least somewhat familiar with the base features of the ATEM Mini, but just a quick recap. The ATEM Mini is a 4-input HDMI switcher that also acts as a USB webcam when connected to a computer. You can use it to bring in HDMI sources like good quality cameras into your computer as a webcam, and you can switch between multiple camera angles. There's also some built-in effects like green screening, as well as picture-in-picture, and even overlaying graphics onto the video. There's a full audio mixer inside as well, so you can fine-tune the audio coming in from each source, as well as from 2 additional 1/8-inch inputs. It can be controlled by the buttons on the top, or you can use the software control app on a computer to access all of the advanced features. So those are the basic features available in all three models. The original ATEM Mini is $295, the ATEM Mini Pro is twice the cost at $595, and the ISO is $895. Each is $300 more expensive than the previous, and each adds additional features on top of all of the features in the lower model. So every feature in the Mini is also available in the Pro, and everything in the Pro is available in the ISO. So if money is not a concern, then let me just make this easy for you. Get the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. There's really nothing else on the market that can do everything the ISO can do, especially at $895. If you're going to try and find some other device or a combination of devices that can do everything the ISO can do, you will be spending a lot more money and end up with a much messier solution anyway. But if $900 is more than you want to spend, then the good news is both the other two ATEM Minis are still excellent options. In fact, the only feature the ISO adds on top of the Pro is the simultaneous recording of all HDMI inputs, also known as isolated recording, which is where the name came from. Other than that, they can do the same things. So with ISO recording, you end up with a whole bunch of files recorded to the USB hard drive. You get each of the 4 HDMI inputs as a separate high-quality H.264 file. You get WAV files from the audio of each of the 4 inputs as well as the 2 microphone jacks. You also get the mixed program recording at whatever quality you're streaming at. It will also save image files for any of the graphics you use in the program, and on top of all of that, it will also create a DaVinci Resolve project so that you can re-edit your show later in case you messed up any cuts or accidentally pressed fade to black during the show. But again, this is the only feature that the ISO adds on top of the Pro. So let's focus on the differences between the original Mini and the Pro, since those differences are actually pretty significant. So the main features added in the Pro that the original Mini does not have are multi-view, recording to a USB drive, and the built-in live streaming encoder. Let's talk about each of these features and why you may or may not need them. First, multi-view. Multi-view gives you the option of seeing all of your cameras on the screen as well as audio meters and your streaming and recording status. This is super useful if you need to keep an eye on all your camera angles and to be able to preview your transitions and other effects before bringing them on air. So if you have remote camera operators, or if you're feeding in somebody's presentation, the multi-view means you know what's on the screen before you switch to it. I also like that it shows the status of the hard drive it's recording to, as well as the streaming bitrate and status. The audio monitors show you which inputs are active and whether they're getting any audio. This is a good way to keep an eye on things if you're running a show by yourself. But you may not need this if you have cameras at fixed angles and are just running the ATEM into an app like Zoom or OBS. Frankly, most of the time I'm using my ATEM in Zoom meetings, I only have 1 or 2 sources plugged in. And I switch between my camera, maybe an overhead camera, maybe a still graphic, or an iPad for a break timer, things like that. So I know what's plugged into each input, and I don't really need the multi-view for it at all. So let's move on to the recording feature. The Pro and ISO let you plug in a USB drive and record the final mix program to disk. This does mean that you can't record to the USB drive at the same time as you're using it as a webcam for your computer. Only one at a time. And no, before you ask, no amount of USB hubs are going to change that. So this ends up being most useful for recording a copy of what you're live streaming as a backup, or even using it to record a multi-camera show that you'll mix live but edit later. I've actually recorded several YouTube videos for this channel by recording on the ATEM Mini Pro and then just doing a bit of editing later. But if your primary use of the ATEM Mini is going to be using it as a webcam into some software on your computer, then you won't be able to use the recording feature anyway. Lastly, let's talk about the streaming encoder. The Pro and the ISO can both live stream directly to platforms like YouTube and Facebook. They have a built-in RTMP encoder that can push the stream over the network directly to any RTMP server. Personally, this is my favorite feature of the Pro and the main reason that I got one in the first place. Because the encoder is built in, it means you don't need to buy a separate hardware encoder, and you don't need to tie up your computer with doing the encoding either. You can actually take the ATEM Mini Pro to a show and operate it entirely without a computer if you really want to. Of course, I do usually end up using a computer to use the software control app to be able to load in graphics and change all the settings, but it does mean the actual encoding work isn't being done by the computer. That can require a powerful CPU if you're doing all the streaming and encoding in software like OBS. Before the ATEM Mini Pro launched, I was actually using a Webcaster X2 as a standalone streaming encoder to take the load off of my computer. And that worked fine, but it is so much nicer having it built into the ATEM now. So when might you not need this streaming feature? Well, if you're not planning on doing any live streaming, just using it as a webcam into apps like Zoom, then this feature won't do you any good anyway. But also, if you're happy with your computer doing the streaming using apps like OBS or Ecamm, that is totally fine too. So, overall, if you don't need the additional features of the Pro, then you will be plenty happy with the cheapest ATEM Mini. By itself, the original ATEM Mini is most useful when paired with a computer. You can use it to seriously improve the quality of your Zoom meetings, either by using a much nicer camera than a webcam, or by adding in multiple camera angles so that you can show close-ups of things you're talking about. If you do want to live stream to YouTube or Twitch or anything, then you'll need to pair that with some streaming software on your computer like OBS, or even the built-in webcam streaming from YouTube. The ATEM Mini will appear just like any other webcam to any of the software on your computer, but you'll be able to connect 4 cameras or other sources, giving you a lot more options of what will be included in the live stream. Of course, you might be wondering, if you're using software like OBS to live stream, why do you need the ATEM Mini at all instead of just a regular capture card? Well, there's still a few good reasons to use the ATEM Mini, even if you're streaming from your computer. If you want to get 4 cameras or other HDMI sources into software like OBS, you're going to need 4 capture cards. Now, if you have a desktop computer, you can get some internal capture cards with 4 inputs, which is not cheap, but is definitely a good option. But for laptops, that's 4 devices connected over USB or Thunderbolt, and will very likely be too much data going over the bus, especially because you probably don't have enough USB ports directly on the laptop. So you'll be using a USB hub, which will then also cause problems. And even then, having 4 video feeds brought into OBS or other software, it's going to require a really powerful CPU to manage all that. So using the ATEM Mini means only one device connected to the computer, freeing up your USB ports as well as the CPU, and it'll work a lot better on laptops than trying to do everything in a software encoder. So the last thing I want to mention is a few minor differences between the original ATEM Mini and the Pro and ISO. One pretty minor difference is that the original ATEM Mini doesn't have DHCP. So if you do want to control over the network, you'll need to set the IP address manually. This isn't a huge deal because you'll probably be connecting it over USB to your computer anyway, and you can control it over USB instead with no setup. But a bigger deal is the media pool. In a recent firmware upgrade, Blackmagic added the ability for the Pro and the ISO to keep all of the images stored in the media pool when the power is shut off. This was a super great addition because now it means you can quickly power on the ATEM and get ready for a show without needing to first restore your images using a computer. However, they were not able to add that feature to the original ATEM Mini. I guess there just wasn't the right hardware inside to be able to do that. So that is one thing to keep in mind as a limitation of the ATEM Mini. If you want to load graphics into it, you'll need to restore them from the software control app every time you power it on. And that takes us to this last sort of meta point about all of this, which is on the topic of firmware upgrades. Blackmagic has been really good about shipping firmware upgrades to these devices over the last year, adding features that we didn't even expect would be possible, just to name a few of the very welcome upgrades. Saving the media pool when the power is off, adding audio delay on the microphone inputs, and being able to dim the top buttons. They were only able to add the media pool to the 2 higher models, almost definitely because the hardware inside of the original Mini couldn't support it. So while these 3 look almost the same on the outside, there's definitely a lot of differences on the inside. And because these are not computers, there are limits to what can be added with firmware updates in the future. So that is one more thing to keep in mind when deciding between these 3. The higher models have more capable hardware inside and will be more likely to get more features added in firmware in the future. Well, I hope this helps you make your decision a little bit easier. Really, you can't go wrong with any of the ATEM Minis. Be sure to check out my other videos for tips and tricks on using all of the ATEM Minis once you've made your purchase. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.